Welcome to the Startup of the Year podcast, where each episode we showcase exciting new companies from around the world. This podcast is produced by Established, creators of the Startup of the Year program. Established is focused on helping organizations with their innovation, startup, and communication strategies.
First off, welcome everybody. I'm Frank Gruber, the co-founder and co-CEO of Established, also the managing partner at Established Ventures. I'm pleased to be here today. We're trying something new. We're doing a live stream a couple different places and had a few technical problems this morning here, but we got it rolling. And I'm here and joined by Briana Warner, but she goes by Bree, and she is the CEO of a company called Atlantic Sea Farms. And Atlantic Sea Farms is doing some really interesting things from based out of Maine, and they are a leader in the space of aquaculture. And they've been doing it for a little while here. And we had the fortune of actually investing in their company a couple of years ago with Established Ventures, and been really enjoying watching them continue to grow as they've become the leader in the kelp farming space in the entire country. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Bree Warner to our cast here. Welcome, Bree. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Frank. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, thanks for hanging with us there too, with some few technical difficulties there to begin with. But for all those that are joining, I wanted to start with just, can you share a little bit more about those that don't know maybe about Atlantic Sea Farms, what you guys are doing, and how you're kind of tackling that space in a new way?
Sure. So Atlantic Sea Farms is based here in Maine, like you said. I think the flannel gives that off. I forgot I was going to be on video today. I thought it was just a podcast, or I would have worn a better uniform. But we're based here in southern Maine, and our focus is on creating a more resilient coast in the face of climate change by creating a seaweed industry here in the United States that's led and fostered by fishing communities that are looking to adapt in the face of climate change.
Awesome. And tell me a little bit more about how you got into this, because it's not how you started, right? You didn't go and say, you know what, I'm going to tackle kelp farming tomorrow. Like that's my thing. Like, how did you get into this, and how has that kind of continued to kind of drive you as you continue to build what you're building?
I'm a development economist by training and by trade. So I was actually in the Foreign Service as a U.S. diplomat for a number of years and focused on economic development specifically. So when I moved to Maine about 11 years ago, I started, using those skills and understanding of, developing economies to start working with the lobster industry as they started positioning themselves to think about ways to adapt to an uncertain future in the face of climate change. And here in the Gulf of Maine, we're facing an issue that is particularly resonant and acute here in the Gulf of Maine, but should be a harbinger, sadly, for what's to come in coastal communities elsewhere, and something for everybody to be watching. But the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than 98% of oceans in the world. That's a
Wow.
terrifying statistic. Yeah, 98%. So, and it's not because Mainers are polluting the water more or polluting the air more. It's just the confluence of currents and the Arctic ice melt is making it such that the upwelling of the current means that this body of water is warming extremely fast. So, in many ways, we are able to either rewrite the same book that has been written by many communities facing pretty abrupt changes in their economies, or we can write a new book. And that's what gets me motivated with Atlantic Sea Farms is we are sitting here with tremendous challenges, a super fast warming water, an overdependence on a lobster monoculture. When people think of Maine, they think of lobster. And it happens to be true. We have a pretty incredible lobster economy here. It's over a $2 billion economy. And in the state north of Portland, there are many communities that rely almost completely on lobster. There are very few other wild fisheries that are of scale or of substance for people to be part of. So that's 4,000 plus lobster license holders who are focused on one species. And so that is our challenge. But in many ways, the opportunity is almost more exciting. And I think when we talk about climate change, we can really get down in the bogs of what's so scary instead of thinking about ways we can create opportunities to make a more resilient future. And for us, we have more coastline than the state of California. We have 4,000 boats. The lobster season doesn't go too much into the winter unless you're offshore fishing, which is a small part of the lobster fleet. And kelp is grown in the winter. It needs, the more sort of protection along the coast with islands and peninsulas that we have, the less deployment of funds that need to go into mooring structures and building out these farms. And this is all at a time when the edible seaweed industry in the United States, I'm sorry, not industry, market, is growing between 12 and 18% a year, and 98% of it is imported. So we have this
Wait.
incredible
So
opportunity.
wow. So 98% comes from somewhere else. What does that look like? Where are these other places? And first off, you're just a wealth of information. I've got about 40 questions lined up already from that short amount of time that you've spoken already. So we'll start with where's kelp come from right now, and then we can kind of dive back into, Maine having the largest coastline in the country.
Yeah, so second largest after Alaska. Alaska always trumps us on that. We just beat California. But most of the seaweed is actually the fastest growing farmed species in the world in the ocean. So it's not oysters, it's not mussels. Seaweed is the fastest growing aquaculture product in the world, meaning it's also the fastest growing as far as size, but amount being grown. And most of the primary producer of that is China. And then there are well behind them producers in Japan, Korea, Indonesia, but almost all of it is coming from Asia. And when I say 98%, that other 2% that we're eating here in the United States, or we were before Atlantic Sea Farms, is all coming from wild harvested, not regeneratively farmed product. So, there's in essence in 2018, only 30,000 pounds came from the United States.
Wow.
The entire United States grew 30,000 pounds of seaweed. And so, there's this opportunity as people are growing these markets, and we're eating a lot from China, which tends to be grown in compromised waters, tend to be grown with questionable labor practices. You have this challenge of the coast, you have this opportunity of the coast, and you have this opportunity of the market, and it felt like it all aligned. And so if no one else is going to build it, someone has to. So that's what we've been doing in Atlantic Sea Farms.
So you said 30,000 pounds was what it was when you kind of got going, or where are you at now? Like what's it looking like for Atlantic Sea Farms and for the industry?
Yeah, we produced almost 1.4 million pounds of seaweed this year, and that's in 4 years, 5 years. Yeah, a lot of growth, and all from fishermen. We're estimating that's about 80% of what was farmed last year, but we won't really know those specific numbers until landing numbers are released in March or April of next year, because we harvested in June. But we know just from kind of anecdotal data and understanding of what's been happening in different areas of the country that it'll be around 80% of the farmed seaweed in America, which we're really proud to see that Maine lobstermen are leading the charge of growing the most climate-friendly food on the planet here in Maine. And while we're still very, very, very small fish in a giant pond of seaweed, here in the United States, we're leading the charge.
Wow, that's phenomenal. And you're taking a really interesting approach, right? You're regenerative farming the sea, and obviously that's a more sustainable. What led you to that approach? And even talk a little bit more about like how you actually are going out and finding lobstermen. Like your approach is like slightly different from, well, it's really unique. So can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I've been working with the lobster community for between 10 and 11 years now. So what we really started with is this idea, even before that, speaking to folks in the lobster community of what do you want to be doing to diversify? How do we create a more resilient coast? Because while lobster is going to be here for a long time, it's becoming increasingly volatile year over year, and we have a very uncertain future in that fishery, given that we don't know kind of what the survival rate of larvae will be as that water warms. So we've been talking about diversification strategies, and one of the ideas that a lot of fishermen had was, okay, well, maybe I'll farm the sea. I'll start farming it, whether it's oysters or mussels or seaweed or what. Like, what does it look like to continue to work on the sea, but do it in a way that they can be more in control of? And oysters is a great opportunity, but it's 3 to 5 years before you even get a product. And it's all intertidal, and it conflicts with the lobster season. Similarly with mussels, is year round. It's kind of a different skill set. You need full-time staff. But seaweed was very appealing to people because it was in their off season. So what people were saying was, hey, I'm really interested in learning more about the seaweed piece. I would love to participate in this market, but we need seed and we need to be able to sell it somewhere because we all know that nobody wants to buy a pound of frozen unprocessed seaweed in a bag. Like that's got a very limited market. So we need to turn it it's more like wheat. Like an oyster can be sold with its shell on and shucked, but seaweed needs to be processed into something that people are excited about, just like wheat. For us with those fishermen, we thought, okay, well, if we start something, there was this existing company here. It was called Ocean Approved. It was the first commercial seaweed farm in the country. And they had been farming on a very small scale. So when I, was working with these fishermen, I was then asked to take over as CEO of this company and start working on this. And, my plan was to start working in this model where we no longer are farming it, but we're making excellent seed. We're developing the manufacturing side of things. We're developing the marketing and then working with fishermen to aggregate kelp in order for small fishermen to be able to, small businesses to be able to thrive within this aggregation and grow seaweed in their off season with their own capital rather than investing in massive offshore farms or anything like that, but truly aggregate and scale through 4 to 12 acre farms owned by fishermen. And so once we started doing that, and a few folks tried it and started and trusted that we could make it work, and they started getting checks and making money, we didn't have to recruit anymore. There's a lot of fishermen who are very excited about working in kelp and very excited about doing this now that it's been proven that people can make money in this business. And at the end of the day, people are all trying to make a better future for their families. And having an opportunity to make a supplemental income in the face of climate change is really appealing to folks who are dependent on one fishery, and having your eggs all in one basket is pretty scary.
Yeah, that's great. It's given them opportunity in the winter too when they're not necessarily doing the same level of lobstering or maybe not lobstering at all. Let's talk a little bit more about education. Like you mentioned, oysters. I love oysters. Made me kind of hungry for lunch actually. But let's think about like how like oysters you can actually shuck and eat. Kelp you can't, right? You can, but it maybe isn't as like easy for folks to understand what to do with it. So how has there been like an educational curve and what have you guys been doing to kind of create that market that didn't necessarily exist before? And then finally, there is the other element. It's not food, right? Like what are the other things you can do with kelp?
So seaweed as an industry, there are many types of seaweed. There are brown seaweeds, red seaweeds, green seaweeds. In the Gulf of Maine, we have over 100 edible varieties of macroalgae. So kelp is one very specific version of many. The US seaweed market, just in that Nielsen can measure just what's at checkout, meaning something that says seaweed, not kelp, not nori, but seaweed in the ingredient panel is somewhere near $1.9 billion. So people are eating this, and it tends to be millennials and younger. We seem to get, there seems to be people who are 45 and under driving that change. And the seaweed snack market, for example, has grown 16% year over year for the past 5 years. If you have a kid in your family, they're likely eating seaweed snacks, and mom and dad is likely buying it for them. If you go to grocery grab and go, you're grabbing sushi, which has seaweed in it, and then that bright green seaweed salad. Which I'm here to tell you, don't grab the bright green seaweed salad. Ask them to bring in a naturally dyed, an undyed product from Atlantic Sea Farms. But, people are eating it at a pretty rapid pace. Now, what we have done as we've scaled is really try to approach new consumers, people in new markets, because we didn't have the volume yet to go head to head with anyone. Doing a snack product or, a frozen seaweed salad product when we were so small just didn't feel like we could get there. But now that we've sort of understood how to scale up our farming, how to scale up our seeds, we're now going after those markets instead. But in the first few years, it was really focused on products that people who were looking for healthier food, people who were a little bit more culinarily adaptive, innovative, folks who shop for the fermented aisle, for example, and I don't mean for beer, but like for kimchis and sauerkrauts. We were making products that went to those first movers, people who we knew didn't need strong education, because I think one thing that people don't think about is how expensive it is to be on the shelf at a grocery store. So having the ability to put out a fermented seaweed salad, for example, that appealed to people who were buying kimchi already, really kind of started building our ambassador base, our first mover base. And those customers have been really incredible. I think with that, we're giving a story of hope and we're showing a story of everyday people making a difference in their world. And that has really resonated, along with the fact that me as a female CEO in an industry, which is seafood, where less than 1% of all C-suite positions are women, has, I think, inspired a lot of earned media, a lot of media outlets like the New York Times, Food and Wine, Martha Stewart Magazine, PBS, like just name your outlet, and they've been really inspired by the Atlantic Sea Farms party story. So it's allowed us the ability to get the voice out there, to get the story out there in a way that otherwise would have been pretty prohibitively expensive.
Yeah, you've definitely done a great job with marketing the story, and I think it's because also the story is one that people want to tell for you. It's an interesting story, of resilience and obviously enabling people to, these especially lobstermen reposition their gear to kind of go a different direction, especially in those off seasons. So that's obviously really interesting. But there's also another angle. The global food security and climate change. Obviously, you mentioned already. How do those play a role in what you're doing? I guess more of the food security side. You talked a little bit about climate already, but you can obviously cover that again as well.
I think seaweed in a greater realm is so important for food security because it is regenerative. It grows really quickly. It's actually restorative to the environment, meaning the environment is better off than when you planted it, as are the communities that grow it. I think regenerative is still sort of a loose term until we have definitions around it. So I always kind of want to hash out what that exactly means. It takes out carbon and nitrogen from the water. So in that way, it's creating food security by kind of proving out a concept that the food system can do well by doing good, that the food system can make the environment better. It doesn't have to be as destructive as we have allowed it to be. And in fact, it can be restorative. But as far as what Atlantic Sea Farms is doing, we're still so small. We have a long way to go before we can really talk about true food security. But what it does do, again, is prove out a model around community ownership and individual owner operators and diversification of strategies where people at the most risk of climate change, the effects of climate change, are taking a hold of their future. And if we're able to inspire that, maybe not for kelp everywhere, but for that idea to be ingrained throughout the United States in different industries, that becomes an issue of a strong component in the fight for food security nationally.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so let's talk a bit about you mentioned a small operation, but you do have, nationally recognized brands. You have your stuff in lots of different places, Whole Foods all over the place. I know Whole Foods has done a lot with y'all. Can you share a little bit about, scaling Atlantic Sea Farms and that brand from zero to where it's at now and kind of where you see it's going? And obviously some
Yeah,
of the lessons learned, obviously, too, would be helpful for folks, you know?
yeah, I think any entrepreneurs, and I know that you speak to many of them all the time, I don't think anyone's going to tell you that 2019 to now has been a cakewalk, or that anyone could have predicted anything that has been happening. I mean, the economy has been all over the place. Consumer preferences have been all over the place. Inflation's up 25% since 2020 for food. And the investing environment has completely dried up for natural and organic food. Um, and so what you're seeing is significant expansion by some of the largest companies out there to own the shelf space that small companies can no longer afford. We're seeing just, I think, something like a 60% or 70% reduction in investment in natural foods. And COVID obviously was a spur of a lot of this, but what that also meant is different ways that people eat. So in 2019, we launched a food service brand. That was what we were doing. We launched in several restaurants across the country, fast casual chains. A collaboration with David Chang and Sweetgreen landed on February 20th, 2020. And quickly after all these restaurants closed and people stopped going out to eat for the better part of a year and a half, we pivoted to retail, except you pivot to retail and people aren't going in the stores. So how do you get people to go into the stores? And oh, by the way, people aren't driving trucks. So how do you even get your product on the shelf in the store? So it's been in many ways like the very basic, you have these great strategies and these great ideas, and it's just the real logistics of life in the past 4 years can knock you down. The things I've learned have been just to get back up and figure out new ways. And another thing we've learned is just being really diverse. So that's basically how we've built up Atlantic Sea Farms over the last 3 years, is focusing on building up some exciting retail products that get first movers, but also starting to move into the ingredient and food service space where people are buying kelp and input, and allowing us to be able to move product in a different way. And for us to be able to have multiple outlets for our partner farmers, to be able to sell their kelp has really allowed us to be resilient on the sales side. On the kind of logistics side of things, there was no one to process seaweed at scale in the United States. And as much as we looked, there was no way to do it outside of our own building a purpose-built facility. So we built in 2021 a purpose-built facility to process kelp, to grow seeds for our kelp, and we're now in a 27,000 square face in Biddeford. And the idea of that is to grow it over time to be worth it. Right now it's worth it because we have to produce product that no one else can produce. But right now we're also not putting enough throughput through the facility in order to absorb our overhead. So it's exciting to be able to figure out these opportunities, because now at this point and forever, what we've built in is the interest of the farmers, which is to grow more kelp, is also the interest of the company, because it makes better economics for everybody. And that sort of that collaboration and that partnership is so true in its most basic form, that it has allowed us to grow in tandem with our partner farmers in a way that is ethical and real at the end of the day, without any skeletons in the closet, because we're all working toward the same thing. So that's where we've built. We are in 4,000 stores now. We have several different SKUs. We just launched an iodine pill with Blue Bonnet Nutrition. We have a green drink with Thorne Nutraceuticals. We're launching a face care line with Credo Beauty in January. Stay tuned for information about that. And we've been working kind of all over the pet space to try to get kelp into the kelp space and into the pet space. And we're really excited about these next 3 years.
That's great. So obviously turning into a supplier of kelp for different people is a big switch from just creating kelp burgers and some of the other products that you do create, like the seaweed salad, which is delicious. But can you talk a little bit more about that effort? Like, what does that look like, and how did those partnerships kind of happen? In that, like, anybody out there that's listening that's in trying to get their product, partnerships together. Like, what are some of the strategies that maybe you took for building those partnerships?
I think the strategies are the same, I think, as most people just trying to sell a product that people want. The issue is there's not a lot of kelp in these supply chains. So the strategy is also telling people why they want kelp, and then why associating with our company makes them look good. Yeah, I mean, I just basically we're really excited about the next 3 years and all the work that we've done to now be able to launch with a scaled farming network and being able to work in new and dynamic industries in the ingredient space, because we now have the scale.
Yeah. Maybe can you highlight a couple of those success stories or partnerships that you really are excited about? Like you mentioned one coming out soon in January, but like what are some of the ones that kind of, you were like so excited to get or whatever, as you're kind of going through this, especially after COVID, and you mentioned like the dire times of 2020 as you made this shift. What did it look like to get some of these partnerships in place, and what was the one that you were jumping up and down for?
Yeah, I mean, Whole Foods has been our absolute strategic thought partner on all things that we have done. I think to say that we have been received a warm embrace from Whole Foods is an understatement. I think, it's a company that is really looking to support brands like ours, and there aren't many brands like ours. I can name a few: Stonyfield, maybe Ben and Jerry's, maybe Lundberg Rice. There's a few out there, but there's not many companies that put people and planet first as their growth strategy. And I think that Whole Foods has been incredibly supportive of our mission and what we're doing, as well as the forms that we're putting seaweed out in, because they appeal to their customers and the health benefits of all of that. And so they have been a pretty warm embrace. And when we come up with new products, they help us work on them. They help us vet them. They help us design out the packaging. They support them going on shelf. If they're not doing well on shelf, we have meetings to figure out how we can do better. I mean, they're not sending us any freebies, but what they are doing is just giving us a lot of thought and advice and consideration. And this year we were named Whole Food Supplier of the Year, which was a pretty significant honor. Yeah, and they have been incredible partners for us. We are so fortunate for the support that we've gotten from them. Another, really exciting prospect, has been like some of the other grocers like Sprouts Farmers Market, Wegmans. We just launched with a few Kroger stores, with Albertson stores. But again, all that was built on the fact that we were able to have strong partnerships at the beginning on that side. I think on the ingredients side, we're really heartened by some of the collaborations we've been doing in pet. Folks like Polka Dog and Earth Animal have been huge proponents of bringing more seaweed into the pet supply chain, both because we all know that pet is one of the most, consumer and, but, one of the most detrimental industries to the environment through growing just massive commodity products and a lot of waste. But additionally, because there's a lot of junk in pet food, and being able to put some products in that are both better for the environment and are known to produce better coat health, to reduce metabolic, to have suppressed metabolism so that your animals are not gaining weight as quickly. There's a lot of really exciting pieces in the pet industry that our pet partners have been supportive of. So those are kind of the big pieces. And then now just moving into nutraceuticals with this Blue Bonnet collaboration is very exciting. They have our brand on the side and are really promoting what we're doing in a big way.
That's great. That's really interesting and exciting. I mean, obviously they've got that co-branding, which is important for building a brand. How, just so folks that are listening know, how big is your team now? You literally just got, mentioned as a supplier of the year from Amazon, or sorry, Whole Foods. And, I don't think people realize how your team is pretty nimble.
Yeah, there's right now there's 18 of us, and that includes all of our manufacturing staff, all of our seed production, our supply production, and our marketing and sales. So it's very small. We feel that every day.
What are some things that could help ease some of that tension? I mean, you've got a really nimble team doing a lot of work.
Yeah, we do. I mean, I think that there's always things that we can be doing better operationally, and that's something we've really been focusing on over the past years. Like right now, we're about to announce that we just got a USDA grant that's going to help us automate some of our production. Right now, we're hand filling every jar of seaweed salad.
Holy,
We have a funnel, and someone scoops it
who's
in.
the head jar? Is there like a head?
I think whoever has the stamina to be the head jar that
Okay.
day. But it's not a particularly efficient way to do things and adds a lot of time. So if we can get a depositor and a jar filler through the USDA, that allows us to do 4 times the amount of seaweed salad in one day. People suddenly have a lot more free time. So,
Right.
it's being a little bit more operationally efficient, and non-dilutive funding like grants from the government are a great way to do that. But also just, I think we've been able to raise quite a bit of money, but we've raised just enough every time. And I think one thing that, you know, we're trying to innovate a new market that's never existed before, a new business, a new industry in the United States that never existed before. It can't be 3 people on a marketing team selling a chocolate bar that's co-packed elsewhere. In 3 people sitting in California talking about beautiful branding on a chocolate bar that they'll never touch. We're doing the seed, the farming, the logistics, the driving, the moving
Jarring.
product from here to there, where
The
the
jarring.
jarring, the fermenting, the blanching, the shredding, like every part of it. And it needs to be well capitalized. And I think that we've been minimally capitalized for the past 5 years for what we're trying to achieve. And so, we're trying to do that a little bit differently now as well.
Great. Are you out additionally, doing more fundraising then this coming year?
We just closed on 3.8 million at the end of October. So we'll be raising another 3.2, which should get us to profitability, which is pretty exciting.
Wow, that's great. Congrats on that that effort. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about just your background a little bit. I know you come from an interesting background. You did start another company. You obviously were a diplomat, did some diplomacy and social enterprise kind of stuff. So can you talk a little bit more about how you got into the space and your experience and how that shaped you as a CEO?
So for me, it's all been about the economic development piece. It's all been it's all been about ways that we can think about diversification. And I think I don't inherently, I don't believe that nonprofits are the way that we're going to see true economic development happen. It needs to happen from a business case that exists long beyond the grant cycle. And so that's, if you want to really, in my view, if you want to really facilitate economic development, you need to make a business case that makes it work. So that's really informed everything we're doing. Yesterday we have a new QA and QC tech, quality assurance and food safety tech. And we were talking about it, and I spent 15 minutes explaining to her how her job helps get more fishermen in the water.
Mhm.
And everything that we do in the company is based around the fundamental mission goal about getting more fishermen in the water with a goal to get 100 fishermen farming 100,000 pounds each. And at that point, we can truly say we've made a strong, positive environmental impact, but a very strong community impact for people to diversify in the face of climate change and make the proof of concept. So that has guided every move I made, and every way that I can wake up every day and keep doing this thing is because of the goal that we're trying to accomplish. And it has allowed us to build a team that is able to be 18 strong and do the work of 35 people, because we're all committed to what we're trying to achieve.
How do you find people that are like that? Especially, this day and age, there's a lot of opportunities for people to jump around and, some folks may not want to jump in and be the person that's literally taking the kelp out of the water or jarring it for hours on end
Yeah.
or cooking it or whatever else
Yeah.
you have to do to the kelp, because I know there's a lot you have to do.
On the farming side, it's not hard to find because we have 4,000 outstanding mariners out on the water, right? There's very few of those guys and gals who don't want to be out on the water. They're not forced to be out there. They want to find ways to make a living on the water. So the farming side is easier to find people, because they're already really good at what they do, and they're looking to their leaders in the industry who took it on first. Now, convincing the first people wasn't easy, but after that, when there's checks coming in, these guys are just make sure that they can pay their stern and make sure that they're able to support their family and put some savings away. On the staff side, I mean, I think it's not for everybody. I can't pretend that we've kept everyone here. Oh, I think I'm unstable. Are you good now?
You're
Okay,
you're
sorry, I
good.
just dropped for a second. I
Yep.
think, we've had people come in and after about 2 weeks look at us with eyes wide open saying, I'm not interested in this hard work. It's cold, it's on weekends, it's late at night, it's brutal. But others who have been here for 5 years and could never see themselves anywhere else. And, our goal is to try to get those people in. But, I think people right now are looking to try to make a difference. It's the biggest thing I hear in interviews for new positions is people saying, I am tired of waking up every day working for a company that's doing nothing to make a difference.
Mhm.
And I think we've been very, very lucky to recruit fantastic people and retain them. I think the complex side of that is, as a startup, when you're underfunded, you're not paying some people as much as some of the bigger companies can. And I think particularly when you're seeing inflation at 25% since 2020, and you're seeing the cost of housing just in Maine, it's astronomical. There was a new study out that a family of four now needs to make $240,000 to
Mhm.
save 30% of their salary, pay their house, and have any bit of fun in the state of Maine. That's that's a crazy high number. It's a crazy high number. And so for startups that are, in a position like us, it does make it difficult, but we have really, really dedicated people.
Yeah, and high number, especially for Maine. I think you take that number to San Francisco or some of these other places, it's not a high number. it's like one person, right? But here it's that number's jumped significantly in the last 5 years. I think that's the point
Absolutely.
thing there. And then that's the other thing you mentioned, the mission driven, right? So you've basically built a mission driven company here. Is there any advice you'd give to other founders that are, have a company like this that are trying to get it going, not in your space necessarily, but like want to launch a mission driven startup?
Um, I think the advice is just, make sure you really, really are ready to live it. It's that this can't be any kind of business like this where you're trying to do something transformational. If it was easy, somebody else would have done it.
Right.
And I always remind people of that when they come in and say, why is there no answer? I'm like, guys, if it was easy, someone else would have done this 10 years ago. I think the other part is just really believing in what you're doing. But the third part is that I say to people all the time, particularly women, and I think just as a side note, 2%, less than 2% of venture funding last year went to women.
Yeah.
Um, Despite the fact that statistically over 45% of the people looking for capital were women. Women don't raise enough. They don't, they don't get enough, but they also don't ask for enough. And whenever people come to me, particularly women that say, hey, I'm thinking about starting this business, I think I need about $500,000 to start. I said, you need at least 3 million. Make whatever you think you need and then multiply it by 4 because the economy changes so fast. Never know what's going to happen 6 to 12 months down the line. So make sure you have at least three years runway.
Yeah, that's great advice. And those numbers you mentioned are pretty astounding too. And that's part of the reason, we were excited to invest in your company and love your background and just your mission driven ability to get out there and do something no one else is doing to make a huge change in the country and world. So obviously, really love what you're doing. I wish more people would jump on board with what you're doing, and obviously, hopefully, they will in the next year when you're out raising more. And if they don't, then they're missing out for sure. So for you, like you've been doing this now, how long? Since 2018, is that right? 2018, I
That
think.
was in August 2018. Yeah.
Yeah. So, 6 something years, right? So 6, 7 years. So yeah, so 6 years. Can you tell us a little bit more about where you see this kind of going now that you've been doing this 6 years? You're going to be pushing forward for another few, right? 5 to 10. Like, where do you want this to go? Like, what do you see as a good kind of path for Atlantic Sea Farms and the effort you're making?
Yeah. So I think, we always start with what do we want to achieve? And first we want to be a profitable company that is working with 100 farmers farming 100,000 pounds of seaweed by 2020 in 2032.
Mhm.
I think we can do it faster.
Wait, repeat
Um,
those again. Repeat those again. I'm sorry.
100 a profitable company with 100 farmers farming 100,000 pounds. So 10 million
Farmers
pounds.
about 10 million pounds. And you just told me earlier that was, when you first got started 6 years ago or whatnot, it was 30,000 pounds, and now we're talking about 10 million pounds.
Million. Yeah.
Wow. That's
That's the
that's
goal,
big.
right? And at that point, we really feel like we can, there's 10% of kelp is carbon. We're taking real amounts of carbon out of out of the water when we do that. We're
And
having,
what does that do? Can you explain what that does for folks that may not?
yeah. So
Yeah.
I needed it to be explained to me for several years before I finally understood it. So I've now distilled it into a perfect kind of short form. But basically, there's too much carbon in the air. We all know that. When the carbon hits the top of the ocean, when the air hits the top of the ocean absorbs that carbon. And
Mm.
that's resulting in what we know as ocean acidification. It's changing the pH. When you
And that comes from
plant
cars, it
kelp,
comes from what? What is that? Cars,
a lot of things, but
airplanes,
one of the
factories,
big things is food.
food.
Food production is certainly everything, factories, all those things. But of course, I'm always focused on the food side of things because it's responsible for just a significant number, and I need to be able to have that number quotable. But there's a lot of industries that contribute to it. Let's say I can say here, so around eight that people estimate that around 805 billion, so 80% of land degradation is because of food, 70% of freshwater use, and 33% of greenhouse gas emissions is just food.
Wow.
That's how we produce our food to survive and
Yeah.
eat. But that carbon is then making it more acidic. And what that means for the ocean, we actually don't know. There are so many organisms in the ocean that we've only studied, not even an eighth of them of what ocean acidification will do. But what we do know is for shell-bearing organisms like clams, like mussels, like bivalves, like phytoplankton, which are producing a whole lot of the oxygen that we breathe, that ocean acidification is creating significant problems for those creating the shell strength, it's reducing survival rates. And when we plant kelp, what it does is it has a locally mitigating effect. So within that kelp halo, the halo of that kelp farm, we have done several studies with Bigelow Labs, Woods Hole Oceanographic, World Wildlife Fund, Oceans 2050. There's been a lot of studies on this that have been validated that growing shellfish within that kelp halo, you're actually seeing significant shell strength improvement within those shell-bearing organisms within that halo because of the reduction of carbon, because the seaweed is removing that carbon. Add to that some new studies that still need to be further studied is that we're seeing that the sediment of the ocean floor below those kelp farms is actually trapping in a lot of the detritus that's dropping down from the farms and sequestering that carbon locally. Now, sequester is a big word that I rarely ever say because sequester means it has to be locked permanently, which just assumes that that ocean floor is never going to be disrupted. So I'm a little less compelled by that, but more by the idea that we are locally mitigating some of the effects of ocean acidification. We're growing a food with no arable land, no fresh water, and no pesticides or other inputs. And when you're eating cauliflower on a plate, I mean, you don't even have to compare it to red meat because red meat already is, that's everybody knows that red meat is in many ways destroying our environment. But cauliflower alone has been grown on tilled land with some form of pesticide, even if organic. It is then watered and you go through this whole process just to get it out. And kelp is grown with none of that. So when you're looking at your plate, when you look at the carbon impact of what you're eating for seaweed versus anything else it's replacing, it's a pretty compelling case. Now compare that to a protein and you have an whole nother exciting story.
Wow. Yeah, and we had a question come in. Actually, it's very in line with what you just asked or what you just spoke about. So, and thank you, Brian, for submitting this question. Appreciate you being here as well. Good to see you're here. Thank you, for being here. How resilient is kelp farming to the long-term effects of climate change in the Gulf of Maine? So, like as you talk about, taking the carbon out, if we don't do it fast enough, is there some impact to this?
So we're farming in the winter, which means that one of the issues is we are seeing in the summer the wild beds are starting to degrade. We're actually seeing a pretty significant loss of wild beds south of Penobscot Bay that was just done by Bigelow Labs, and that's because of what's happening in the summer. So planting in the winter makes it a lot more resilient.
Wild beds meaning stuff that's wildly grown or not farmed, just wildly grown out there in the world.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. So when you're having heat spike for the Gulf of Maine in the middle of July is similar to what the heat is in the water in New York. You have a problem. But in winter, kelp can grow as far south of New York into Virginia. So there's, you're seeing these depletion of kelp beds, but it's mostly because of hot summer spikes. Additionally, we are able to look to folks that have been doing this for 40, 50 years. And that's Korea and China. Now there's good cases and bad cases. And Japan. There's kind of the view of three stories. Japan has never done any strain selection. They've never done any basic husbandry of their kelp, and their kelp industry is collapsing because they've never adapted anything to climate change. Japan's waters are a whole lot warmer than Maine's, by the way. So this is like 40, 50, 60 years projections. China has over-selected. They have taken their seaweed and selected the genetics so finely that they're seeing a collapse in their seaweed because they've over-selected the genetics. Korea, on the other hand, has invested in significant strain selection and husbandry that has allowed them to have such diverse species on their farms that are custom-made for water that they're able to continue to thrive and grow in the face of climate change because they have been again, not GMOs, but just selecting for smarter species and growing in the winter, just like us. So, and again, Korean waters, as you know, just look on the map, they're much, much, much warmer than Maine. So we're not concerned about a negative effect on our products in the future that way, but also we're looking to diversify the species that we grow. Kelp is one of many, many species of seaweeds that grow in the Gulf of Maine. And there's some seaweeds that are super exciting that grow in much warmer temperatures as well, like dulse, which is a protein heavy red seaweed. So there's a lot of ways that we can strategize for that. It's a long way in the future and we need to be preparing now, but in many ways we see it as a advantage for us.
That's funny you say it dulce. I always say dulce. I don't know why. I always think it's dulce. I think it should be. Yeah, exactly.
Dolce.
Appreciate that correction on my pronunciation. Great question, Brian. Thanks. Hopefully that answers it for you. And we got another question in from the audience here. Tim, thank you so much for being here, Tim, as well. And he says, Bree, congratulations on perseverance and your very challenging business. You mentioned getting profitable by 2025. Is that correct? And what are the mission critical metrics which you need to achieve to reach this major milestone? Like
Yeah, our goal is by it's actually June 2026 that we're looking at for
in
profitability.
2026?
So
Okay.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of metrics that's mostly, margin growth based on putting more throughput through the facility. It's based on making sure that we're diversifying more from retail. Retail is a hard game. You pay for the shelf space, you pay for quarterly sales, you pay for marketing, you pay for shelf tags. I think people don't know when they go to the grocery store that they don't organically discover anything. It's because things are popping out at them with yellow tags and flashing lights, and they see it on Instacart 6 times before they order it. Someone has to actually pass a product in the grocery store 6 times if you're a woman before they buy it, and 9 times before if they're a man. And that's we need to try to shrink that 9 times to 4. And so there's a lot that happens in retail that's just very expensive. And it's also in smaller format containers. So moving to diversified, moving more into the ingredient and food service space now that food service is a little bit more back on its feet. And then making sure that we're able to be more efficient in our processes in the manufacturing facility.
Yeah, great. Those are all. I mean, is there anything that anybody listening could help with any of those aspects? Is there an ask out there if are you looking for help in any of those areas, or is there anything you're looking for that could be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's always like I said, we're raising another 3.2 million in equity. We're always interested in hearing from folks on that. We have a great set of shareholders, including you, Frank, and such a really diverse group of shareholders that has a lot of great advice.
And I should
Um,
just mention it's not just me. We did a collective, as a syndicate, so we've got a group of folks that were part of that. So obviously appreciate all those folks as well.
that's right. But the other piece is philanthropy. And we're trying to do strain selection, and I can't do that from working capital because we don't know what works yet. Nobody's ever cultivated dulcet scale anywhere in the ocean.
Really?
So, we need some trial and error. And that's correct. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't grow in Asia, so there's never been any farming in the Western Hemisphere. So who would have done it? And dulse is one of our senior scientists always makes the case that we're biologically related to mushrooms as dulse is to kelp. These organisms have had billions of years to adapt and evolve, and they were one of the first organisms around in Earth. So their family tree is pretty expansive, much more expansive than mammals, much more expansive than terrestrial, plants versus mammals. So there's a lot to learn and there's a lot to figure out and there's a lot of value there, but we need to be able to, do that work. So we're always looking for both private philanthropic investments as well as, federal funding to support some of those efforts.
That's great. Those are good to know and appreciate it. Maybe anybody listening, please do think about that. If there's anyone that could help there, definitely reach out to Bree. And Bree, I guess since we are saying that now, we usually wait to the end, but how can people get in touch with you if they wanted to?
A
Get
good
contact.
place is info at Atlantic Sea Farms. because depending on the questions, it'll go one to one of our people. So info at always is a great place to watch. It's a real person that answers it every morning. It's our marketing brand manager.
Okay.
In addition to doing high level brand management work, she also answers info at.
She's also closing jars over there on the side.
Exactly. So that's the best way to reach us.
Okay, info at atlanticseafarms.com. All right, great. Thank you, Bree, for that. Got another question here came in from our other platform. If you had resources to launch a new aquaculture initiative tomorrow, what problem would you aim to solve? Ooh, that's close to your business. I don't know if you want to answer that.
I love it.
Oh, you love it? Okay.
Yeah, no, that's fun. So if I were to solve any aquaculture issue let's kind of consolidate it down to the US and Maine in specific, because I think I would have different answers globally and nationally. I get really excited about this kind of question, Frank, because I'm always mostly hearing questions about like, our products and things like that. So this is fun. I think here in the Gulf of Maine, there's this pretty significant perception. So Maine is very rural. It's the most rural state in the country, which people don't know, 1.2 million people. We have a thriving group. It's currently the biggest housing stock per capita of unoccupied housing. So people who come up in the summer. This is all code for we have a whole lot of rich summer people. There is a perception among a loud minority, or I'm not sure, it might be the majority, but it is at least a loud minority of those riparian landowners. Riparian meaning people looking out to the ocean, because they're the only people who can afford looking out into the ocean in Maine anymore, which wasn't the case 15 years ago. Who look at aquaculture as devaluing of their homes. And as such, they oppose the leasing of farms to happen in Maine. And they've caused a huge issue with people who are trying to make a living farming oysters, farming mussels, farming scallops, farming fish. People who are trying to look at the coast of Maine and say, this could be the regenerative breadbasket for the United States. We import over 83% of our seaweed right now. Our seafood, not seaweed, seafood in general. And we don't know where it's coming from. Maine could provide the seafood for the entire country, and it could be regeneratively farmed with very little negative impacts. I mean, mostly positive impacts, and employment for the people of Maine, and an ability for people to afford living in the place that they want to be on the coast. Yet somehow riparian landowners are able to block access to leasing of farms. So I would just say, if I could solve one thing here in Maine, it would be, getting people on the coast to recognize that mussel rafts are beautiful, oyster bags are beautiful. We should be promoting the growth of sustainable regenerative aquaculture here on our coast in a way that is embracing the value that it could bring to our state in the future, a future that is really uncertain for our coastal communities.
Wow, that's something that I would not have thought of. And I think it's interesting to me. I'm thinking about it, and if you think about the parallel to like Napa in vineyards, or like, Midwest in cornfields, right? Like, I don't know if people get upset about cornfields as they might about water. It's really funny to think about. Like, people get upset about water,
You
but
you have less say over a pig farm here in the state of Maine than you do over an oyster farm. It seems
wow,
completely backward.
isn't it? It's kind of funny to think about.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a good one. It's a really good answer on that one. So you do think about these things. So we're almost at time here. Is there anything? Actually, we are at time. Is there anything else we haven't talked about that you'd like to share with the audience, with everyone that's listening?
I think just going into the end of this year and into a new year, I think it's very easy for those of us who are focused on the environment to feel defeated and to feel like there's little hope, and that the political divisiveness of this country um, is so problematic that there's no ability to make progress. And I would just say, going in with gratitude to the end of this year for all the people doing amazing things, and recognizing that even though there's some scary things that happen every day, there is some exciting stories that we should look to continue to see that there's hope. there has been a restoration of some ice caps in the Arctic recently. We've seen some growth. That's not a lot, it's small, but it's promising. We have 40 fishermen who are going out in the middle of dead winter and checking their lines for how big the seaweed is that they're going to be harvesting in April and May. And they themselves have grown the market to 30,000 to 1.3 million. And there are so many stories of hope, and there is so much opportunity out there. But the only way, I know we always say this to our kids, right? Like if you're defeating yourself before you do it, you'll never do it. But yet we don't apply that to the ways that we can actually make differences. And I'm not one of those like, think national, act locally. Like, yeah, okay. But like really, truly, we can all make a difference if we maintain hope and we also, take action where we can and demand better.
Well, that's a great message, and I appreciate you sharing here today. Bree, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really a fascinating discussion. I know I'm excited about Atlantic Sea Farms, and obviously as you continue to lead in a sustainable way here in Maine, but also across the country as a leader in the space. And so really, really appreciate what you're doing, and obviously want to get anybody that's interested in connecting with you to reach out. So info at atlanticseafarms.com is the way to do it. And for those listening today, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate those that were live in the audience, those that were listening afterwards on the re-repeat on Start of the Year podcast or in other places. Really appreciate you listening. And remember, if you do have a startup idea, today is the best day to start, not tomorrow. Get that journey going. You're going to iterate. It's not going to be the perfect thing out of the gate, but you got to get something going and continue to build. And obviously we're here with Start of the Year and Established Ventures and establish it as a community, with access to resources and support and conversations like today with Bree to kind of help you along the way. And hopefully you grab something from our conversation today that can help spark, a progress forward or a new idea or a new kind of way of thinking about things. So thanks so much. Until next time, I'm Frank Gruber. Really appreciate it. And Bree, thanks again for being here. I know you're busy and I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me,
Thank you
Frank.
so much. Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to the Startup of the Year podcast. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll be back with another episode soon.